Good morning. Hi. My name is Kim Davis. I'm from New Jersey. So traveling here this morning was extremely frustrating, especially in the rain. So today we'll be talking about our journey with scaling Agile and some of the lessons learned. Just to give you a little bit about what we do, I work for a company called ASRC Federal Mission Solutions. We are a subcontractor to Lockheed Martin. The greater ASRC Federal does a number of things, but we specifically, under Mission Solutions, do software development for the Navy. Our joint venture with Lockheed is we're very much at the bottom of the V chart, so we do a lot of their software. They're up top, they do systems and studies and level 3, 4, and 5 testing, right? That's our traditional model. Now with our movement to Agile, this has been very much a joint venture, like I said. Our scaled approach has included both organizations, so we've really tried to, even though we are two separate companies, tried to combine and organize ourselves into release trains and so forth. So that's kind of what we've been dealing with. We've been in this business since the 1970s, doing work for the Aegis Combat System, if anybody's ever heard of that. We do a number of other DoD contracts with the Coast Guard and littoral combat ships, a number of other similar platforms. So that's a little bit about what we do. Why I call this scaling the Agile wall is oftentimes as industries, including ours, make this transition, they always blame Agile, and Agile is the wall, right? Oh, it's Agile's fault, right? Not our fault. None of those problems have ever existed before. It's Agile's fault, right? So this is just about how we kind of made some changes and some shifts to kind of scale this wall, if you will, and get over it, right? And move so we can move forward, because that's always important in a very vast, rapidly changing environment. So just a little bit about our transformation. So again, like I said, two large companies coming together to make this shift. So we had about 165 teams that included about 2,000 people. All the work is in the Department of Defense, so you can imagine there's a lot of red tape there. 40 plus years of waterfall, so a very, very set in our ways mindset, right? We're a CMMI level 5 company, so we have a lot of process in place. And earned value management, meaning things that we just talked about before this with PMI, PMP, very traditional management styles. And our ultimate customer, the ultimate stakeholder, is all over the place. They're all over the world, stationed in ports or out on the ship. So actually interacting with them to really understand what it is they're looking for is pretty difficult. So just to kind of put that into perspective, I think when we're in a good place where I can say, yes, our transformation is good, we've matured, we can just kind of smoothly coast. I would love to write a book about this, because this is just quite the challenge. So goals for today. I could spend a whole day talking about this, maybe even days, but for today I'd like to leave you with a couple of things. If you leave here today, I don't want you to have to ask some of the questions that we've always asked ourselves in the past couple of years. If we could start all over, how would we do it, right? So I'd like to kind of help you prevent some of that, right? It's always good to reflect and see what your journey has been and where it's taken you. But let's avoid some of the blunders that we've experienced. A lot of organizations like to jump right into it, especially with us. We're a legacy type of organization. We're a highly regulated industry. We love process. Process is very comfortable. So why not just jump right into it? Well, there's a very important concept to understand. There's a big difference between doing Agile and being Agile. And what does that mean at scale? And this is always a challenge, right? But understand that along the journey, it's well worth it. You're going to learn a lot. It's going to teach you a lot about your industry, your organization, and how you can work together to accomplish some difficult tasks, right? So that's the goals of my talk today. So a little bit more about some background. So I'll tell you about our scaling blunder. So basically, everybody hears that Agile makes you better, cheaper, faster, right? So let's do it, right? Let's just jump into it. So you get people like in the leadership or executive positions that come in and say, yeah, let's do this. It's going to save us money. It's going to get product out there faster and of higher quality. And somebody's like, yeah, why haven't we been doing this? That sounds awesome, right? So let's develop a plan because we love plans, right? Let's train everyone. Let's hire some coaches, and in like 6-ish months, we'll be totally ready to kick off Scaled Agile's release planning, big room planning. Yes, right? Sounds great. Go off and do it. Oh, and by the way, because we love metrics so much, don't forget that we have to measure our progress here. And my favorite, since Agile's supposed to save us money, this whole thing isn't going to cost us anything, right? How many of us have heard that? So about a year goes by, right? And the same people come back together. And the people that thought this was such a good idea, they're like, wait, okay, so we're still delivering product, right, at the same rate. And we've established a metric called velocity, so we must be doing Agile, right? But we're still not better, faster, cheaper. So what the heck? Right? So the team that's conducting this comes back and says, well, we ran a pilot, and it was for one program, and we learned a lot. So then we decided that with those lessons learned, we would try to just scale this to the rest of our teams. So we hired some coaches at $150 an hour, right? And then we scaled our pilot, and then we found out that this approach didn't work so well for everyone. We needed to actually reorganize, and we needed to discuss co-location since we're all over the place, right? The teams, they started to increase the velocity, so we thought we were doing a good thing, but then we found out that they were only just increasing their points. So we adopted an Agile toolset, and we have a set of metrics that we use now, like you've discovered, velocity, right? And they're like, wait, so you mean to tell me we've spent like $5 million and we have a new set of metrics and a reorg? What about all this stuff that we're supposed to do with Agile, right? What do the coaches teach us? And they said, well, some teams are actually doing Agile and practicing the ceremonies, but there's definitely something missing, right? Enter the Agile facade. Like we're pretending to be something that we're not, like this goldfish. Right? So, Agile is a mindset, right? It's a set of principles. It's a large umbrella where all of these different frameworks fall under. Scrum, XP, Kanban, Scaled Agile, right? All of those things fall under the same Agile umbrella. So there isn't enough emphasis on what that mindset is supposed to provide us no matter what we're doing. Transparency, right? When you dive into a process, when you dive into something like Scaled Agile, even if it's something like Scrum, and you don't have everybody else on board with you, right? You're establishing some ideas, and the people, you're trying to drag people along. It's like dragging them up a mountain with their feet in the mud, right? They don't understand why. You have to be transparent with why you want to do this. This is a large organization, right? And if one person is making a decision at the top and nobody else underneath understands why, you're going to have resistance. So identify what those reasons are. Be transparent with them, and you'll eventually get some people buying into it. When you have oops, I went the wrong button. Went backwards, back to my fish. And when you have some transparency, you start to shift this mindset. One of the other mindsets with this is empowerment. You're shifting from traditional management styles to a management style where you're giving your teams the opportunity to make some decisions. You're empowering them. You let them own it, right? They want to own it. They want to figure out how. That's what engineers do, right? As leaders, we're there to set guidelines, right? We're there to give them the what and the when. Let them determine the how. And with that, you get continuous improvement. Once teams start to buy into this and they're empowered to make decisions, they want to be better. They want this organization to be better. As a leadership team, you want your organization to be better, right? Continuous improvement needs to happen at the team level, it needs to happen at the management level, it needs to happen at the leadership level. It's at scale. And eventually, that mindset takes you down to a path where you can realize continuous delivery. So the concept here with this mindset, and this is maybe organizations value different aspects of this, right? Because not all organizations are created equal, is that over time, the shift allows you to realize different things that Agile is supposed to provide. And when you're part of a large organization, the key thing is to start with that transparency, right? And you will realize other things from there. And a lot of these other things are some underlying key things associated with being Agile, right? Not just doing it, not just jumping into it. All right, so getting started. So version 1 puts out this annual report. This was the 11th report that they put out. And there's a number of things that they measure. And this metric is one of them, why organizations adopt Agile. And the number one in the 11th was to accelerate product delivery, right? And they're followed by a number of things. We've got managing changing priorities, increasing productivity, and so forth, right? And all of these things are great reasons to adopt Agile, right? What are your goals with being Agile? Is it to produce more products faster? Right? Are you trying to increase your quality? What is it? Right? Once you kind of have an alignment around why, you can establish goals and clear business objectives. Business objectives, which I will get into, are important for, again, transcending information down your organization, right? To get that buy-in so you can move forward. Okay, so where do we get started? Right? So we were handed a 3-year transformation plan. It was like a stack of slides like this. I was like, oh. We were told we were using the scaled Agile framework. We were told how we should organize our teams, because that sounds like a good idea. We were given 2 days of Agile training, and then it was go off and make it happen. So talk about drinking through the fire hose, right? You're like information overload. All these people that have never even heard of Agile or Scrum or any of these things before are now like, you want me to do what? So we were basically told how to do it, right? And nobody really understood what it meant to be Agile, right? So we were forced into that, right? Again, jumping right into a process. Scaled Agile framework. And if any of you have ever seen the Scaled Agile framework, I'm sure you can understand that it's a lot to just jump right into. So one important thing is to understand, where are you playing? Are you in adoption? Are you in transformation? You will eventually, if you understand what it means to be Agile, you will go from adoption to transformation over time. Now, it's important to understand where you want to be here, because if you're in adoption, you're just trying to fit Agile in with your existing culture, right? So knowing a little bit about my existing culture and how it's always operated, you can probably see how there was some headbutting, right? Resistance, some things that didn't make sense, right? As you start to shift towards transformation, you're transforming your culture so that these two things can live in harmony together, right? And that's where we want to go. So like I've been saying, a big difference between doing Agile and being Agile, and yes, I stole this graphic from a company called Agile Tricks, so I left their marking up there for them. So, but again, doing Agile, adoption versus being Agile, transformation, you can get some benefit from, adopting some Agile practices, maybe things like stand-ups help better coordinate, or adopting a tool might help other teams coordinate from a scaling perspective, because you're going to need that visual and automated level of coordination. But unless you realize what it takes to be agile and make that transformation shift, you're kind of stuck at 20% maybe, right? You're only going to realize so much benefit. It's the shift in that transformation, the shift in your culture plus adopting some changes that gets you so much further. Does that make sense? Good. Okay, so like I said, adoption versus transformation. So this quote I found in a book, and the book is Practical Approach to Large-Scaled Agile Development. It's an easy read if anybody ever wants to pick it up. But this says, to successfully create the significant breakthroughs in your development effectiveness that are possible with Agile, it has to be aligned with why you want to do it in the first place, right? The goals, and what you need to do to achieve it from there. So how do we get from adoption to transformation? Now I mentioned business objectives, right? So this is where it comes into play. Business objectives. Why do we want to do this? We talked about goals. What are our goals? Everybody's goals are going to be different. When you establish a set of business objectives that transcend up and down your organization, it becomes very clear. Now, how do you establish these objectives? Through continuous employee engagement. So you don't make decisions as a leadership figure in a vacuum, right? You're getting feedback from your employees on what they think. So how many of you have ever had a senior leadership type of person come down and talk to you and ask you, what do you think? What do you think we should improve on, right?
Yeah, not so much.
Not so much, right? Right, so you wonder what they're doing up there in their fish bowls, right? Go ahead.
Turn it around for a second. So what senior leader's going to say, I make my decisions in a vacuum? They're going to, their mind's just going to be, I get constant information. I have a stack of metrics. I have a slide deck this thick. So how do you change that culture, minds? That's really where you got to start with this.
Right. So one thing that we've started to do is we have walkarounds. And we have a team of people on our leadership team that are responsible for different things in the organization, but ultimately they come together and make decisions, right? So these team of people come down and they talk at the different levels of the organization. They talk with the managers, they talk with the teams. The teams, all of a sudden you get somebody to come down and they're like, am I in trouble? No, we really want to understand, what you think. Sometimes we'll even have forums like this, a training session. In the training session, we'll have a retrospective. And the retrospective pulls data from, all right, now that we taught you about this, and you're in reality, what do you think? What do we need to do to blend the two worlds together, the reality and the practical world, and to get us over some hurdles, or to make improvements, or do you have suggestions? And have them be part of the solution goes a long way, right? So yes, you're going to get a lot of information. We have collected a lot of information on employee engagement and are engaging them to give us feedback, right? The key thing with that is to not turn those sessions into, excuse my French, a bitch fest, but to make sure that, because then you're like, oh, all it is complaining, and you leave with all this negative energy, but you want them to identify solutions. It's like, okay, you identified a problem. What are some of the solutions that you have? Or here's the problem that this person presented, audience, what are some solutions that you can come up with? Maybe you spend an hour brainstorming on some solutions. Maybe you make that part of your culture, right? Solution brainstorming. There's a lot of different ways that you can spin this, but when it comes down to it is that you have all this information, and as a business, you have to make good decisions, right? So that's where that team comes into play to help identify what's our priorities, what are our goals, right? We have to align these decisions with our goals and almost have like an improvement backlog based off of those goals. So you can almost have your own little leadership backlog of ways to kind of, this thing we're going to work on first, then this, right? And the idea here is that as you start to accomplish things and integrate things, new things, improve things into your organization, the people said, I've been heard, and they listened, and now we have an improved solution. We can move forward now. We're not just stuck in this complaining or whatever it might be, right? So that's kind of the intent here. Organizations that have been operating a certain way for a long period of time often will have to go through this because they don't understand why we want to change because things are working, right? So if you align new goals with clear objectives and you're very open with them, it kind of creates that like visual that they can see, right? They can see how you're making progress. Go ahead.
So, I mean, I'm hitting a wall. Should not the executive be not only on board and trained? I mean, it needs to come from the top. And if it's not, that's my view, and maybe in my experience, because if they're not, it's going to be pretty difficult to do it.
You have to have executive buy-in.
Okay.
Yes, absolutely. They have to understand this. They have to understand Agile. They have to understand what they want to do with it, right? Because they're the ones that have to support it and enable other people to make it a reality for the rest of the organization.
Thank you.
Sure. Other questions? All right. So like I said, once you have established these objectives and there's clear goals associated with them, it can transcend down the organization, right? Which is critical to get that buy-in, right? So let's talk about scaling some of the principles. So principle number 4 talks about business people and developers working together daily, right? So when you have that active listening from the business people, the leadership figures within your organization, they learn from what's going on at the team level or the management level or other levels within the organization. It reduces fear and creates trust, right? Number 12, at regular intervals, the team reflects on how to become more effective. Right, then it tunes and adjusts its behavior accordingly. So this is all about retrospectives and continuous learning. So when you combine the two, trust at scale, continuous learning at scale, you get continuous improvement at scale. So these are things that feed this concept of continuously improving, which means you're continuously evolving your organization. So how do you be visual with this? So this is just an example to show how you can kind of put your thoughts, put your objectives into a quick visual. So around our office, we actually have screens like this on the wall. Anybody can go up to them. They flip through a number of announcements, but this is one of them, just an example, not real data, that you can see. So we talk about high-level deliverables, which may vary from each product area that we have. But the key thing is that the business objectives are for evolving the organization are the same. And you can clearly go up to one and see where we're at. The green means we've met these things, and the red is that we're not quite done there, right? Once an objective is done, you start going back to your list of objectives to complete from a leadership level. And you start to reprioritize that list, and what's the next one to move into progress? Very much like a Kanban board for stating your objectives and moving forward. Go ahead.
You mentioned kind of executives coming out, talking to the teams. I'm curious, in an embrace transformed culture, what do those conversations sound like? Because if the focus is not on how, it must be around business objectives and getting feedback and continuous improvement opportunities relative to those business objectives. How do those conversations sound?
So honestly, a lot of personality comes into play. We have different people that have different styles. Some people are more direct, like, hey, we're working on this project over here. How is it going? What are some of the goals that you guys have achieved? Have you had any hurdles you have to jump over? And if you find those, that's where the conversation starts to go down a little bit deeper, right? Because then it brings out, well, this is what we experienced, and this is the reasons why we think, right? And here's some suggestions that we've kind of come up with. The idea is that when you're approaching, when your culture, when you start to establish that type of culture, the teams that all of a sudden an executive or a leadership or a manager type person comes up to you and starts having that conversation, that you're kind of expected, or it's almost organic to suggest a solution or some of those things. But the idea is talk on a personal level, right? Because we're still people, we're not just robots, right? We do, we want to connect on that level too, but also dive into what are the experiences and what are some of the problems we're facing and the potential solutions we have to address some of those problems. And they take that and, make a note of it and kind of feed it into like a master list of things to accomplish or achieve.
I have
Go
one
ahead.
question. Working for Lockheed, so is technology your product? Like when you guys are working there, like you guys are providing like a system for something
Yes.
on a ship or something?
We provide systems of
Okay.
systems.
What if technology wasn't your product, like at a company? For example, I work at JP Morgan Chase, right? So we're a bank, but the technology part, I feel like is a service to the bank,
Okay.
right? So how can I get that executive buy-in, right? When it's not, the product is not technology.
That's a great question. So my suggestion in those types of situations, so I'm very used to just we do software, that's what we do.
Right.
And I've often talked to other companies that the IT, the technology is just a service to facilitate the rest of the organization, right? Like insurance companies, like would be
Right.
another one. It's very much still the same, right? It's what can we benefit from doing things differently? And they have to have an understanding of what Agile is and what are maybe some of the frameworks, some of the potential solutions you could jump into. But the key thing is in my mind, is to understand Agile at the heart, right? The core principles, and understand which one of those principles they can relate to the most. And that might be like a business objective perspective as well. Which one of these things is really going to get them to see, like if it's, trying to think of one, delivering software frequently. Is that what we want to do to satisfy? Because we're a service, right? That would help satisfy the rest of the company, right? And if we can get stakeholders, then they can tell us, how those things are helping benefit the rest of the company. It's all about small victories, right? You can't just decide we want to do X, Y, and Z goals, right? It's small victories, especially in scaled organizations. And in a services type of thing, I could see that being even more so. Go ahead.
Yeah, so on the example you're listing, like big, looks like big goals, and I'm wondering, or maybe I see. I'm wondering if you also had particular metrics for projects.
Well, these are just examples, but yeah, we try to have metrics. Some of the metrics, we've done a lot of traditional Scrum metrics, but we're migrating from velocity type metrics to flow-based metrics, which look at cycle time, how much time things go from start to finish. So what's your average? And you use kind of like a standard deviation to kind of make predictions going forward. And then flow-based metrics also help you identify where your bottlenecks are. So if you have like a Kanban board, which I have an example in here, and you're seeing that your flow is greater in like the test area, you know that's an area of improvement, that needs improvement, rather. So it kind of helps you identify where your bottlenecks are so you can optimize that area and improve going forward. Go ahead.
You talk about small victories. Let's say we're in the same situation that you guys were in, right? We're traditional waterfall, complex organization, very little Agile training.
Mm-hmm.
What small victories would you maybe go after first? Is it establishing ceremonies? Is it, organizing around a major platform like Valley or something like that?
That's a great question. It really depends on your culture and how mature you are. For us, if I were to go back in time, it would have been first buy-in from the SLT, the senior leadership team, more buy-in. We were in a weird spot where we changed leadership, so the initial leadership people were like, yeah, let's do this, sounds good, we kind of get it. The other one was like, we don't get it, right? So we had a problem there. And then teams. Teams is huge. Teams are absolutely huge. They are the heart of this. If you can't get teams to come together and stay together, this is not going to work well. So that's a big thing, a really big thing. When we first started doing this, and like I said, we were told how to organize our teams, which was not a good thing for us. We were struggling because we are a very matrix organization, and we were told, you should organize by functional domain. Meanwhile, we've got 50 different programs asking for stuff from the same domain. And it was all over the place. So people would be like, well, I'm on this team, but I'm working over here for this team. You often have to shift the mindset to bring work to the team and not people to the work, so that team can actually figure out how to work together. But if you don't do that, you're going to be stuck in the storming phase of bringing teams together forever, right? And you'll never figure out like the norming and how to kind of get together and actually accomplish work. So I'd say that's one of the biggest things to do first. Absolutely, is focus on teams and how to facilitate that.
And how to bring work to them.
Yes, bring work to them. So one of the things that we did, instead of calling a team like you're the air control team or the track management team, come up with a team name, right? And our teams are so creative. They said, we're the A team. I'm like, come on, guys. The A team? We had another one. We're the J team. I'm like, what? So the A team, they're just a feature-based team now. So what happens is when at a scaled level, when those larger chunks of work come in, they'll say, all right, we'll take this chunk, but then over the course of the release, that we own that and we decide how to decompose that and manage that work, right? And they can handle any feature that comes their way. So they've grown their skill set to be more cross-functional so that they can be feature-based. Go ahead.
So these teams, do they have a focused area, like they're not just real generalists. There's teams that if there's anything in this area, you kind of.
So what we did, because we were afraid of that, in 3 years everybody would just be generalists and we had no subject matter expertise.
Yeah, right.
So what we did was we formed, and we stole this from Spotify, formed Spotify guilds, basically, and we renamed it to something more suited for our organization. But if you look up Spotify guilds, there's a lot of cool videos out there about that. And what the guilds are, it's just basically a group of people that are interested in a certain area. So people that want to become subject matter experts in a certain functional domain. So you create almost communities of interest with those guilds, and they're the people that almost become the superheroes or the firefighters when there's a big problem in that area, or the mentors for certain areas, or sometimes we don't include them as part of the team's capacity, so they can go and support teams as needed. So there's a number of different strategies we've taken with that, but that was our way of balancing, maintaining like T-shaped people where they've got depth in areas, but they also have breadth and they can handle a number of different features.
What about the folks that don't participate? Not everybody participates in these guilds, right? So the rest of the team.
Right. So they're more dedicated to a team, right?
Okay.
So the people in the guilds might be, in some product areas, they might be 100% just on a guild because the work it's such a critical area. They're all over the place regardless.
Right, yeah.
In other areas, they might be 25% on a guild and 75% on the team, and they're like support that or on the guild as needed, but most of their work is done through the team.
Right.
So it's a balancing act, and our managers, like our functional level managers, are apt to kind of figure out who goes where, basically.
Yeah, because so we have teams with colors.
Okay.
Blue, yellow, green, but they tend to focus on a specific domain area. Mm-hmm. And the guilds, I think, are equivalent to our like technical folks. Like the technical folks will get together with the architecture.
Yes. A lot of those
kind
people
share that way,
have.
but it hasn't been at the business domain level. Right, we haven't done it that way, so that's interesting. So you're doing it at the business domain level as well as
Yes,
maybe
we do.
technical level
We do
as well.
both. Exactly. Yep. Okay, great questions. Love it. So, just to kind of sum it up for lesson number 1, right? We don't want to make decisions in a vacuum, obviously. That should be a no-brainer. clear goals, right? And clear business objectives and the ability to transcend that information up and down your organization. Understand where you're at. Are you in adoption or have you not gotten there yet? How do you get to transformation? Again, transparency, engage and empower your employees. Build a culture that embraces continuous improvement. They want to get better. And this will help you get to a number of different areas. And like Agile planning, a detailed transformation plan like we got will be obsolete in like a week, I'm telling you. So you don't want this, right? That's why I feel like I am. Pull these guys up a mountain. But now we're starting to get towards this, right? Where everybody's kind of getting it, they're on board, and they're following the people that have bought into this, that are promoting it, that are facilitating it for the organization. So any questions so far on what we just covered? No, we just had a lot of questions. All right, so enterprise coordination, right? We want to create meaningful plans and deliver value. That's what we do with Agile. So where we got started with release planning. So we adopted SAFe, like I said. We did big room Agile planning in the beginning, right? So we did it for one program. Then we decided this worked well because one program fit in one room, and we had like the yarn on the wall with the dependencies and stickies everywhere. And we had, the Scrum of Scrums iterated throughout, and the Fist of Five. We did the whole 9 yards. It was awesome. All right, but then we tried to scale that to the rest of our common source library, which is like our backbone of the program that it feeds like 50 different programs. It didn't work so well. But customers said we must move on, right? We must continue this. And we've traditionally marched along a Navy-driven build plan. So in the beginning, when we had one program, it was very easy to align a release cadence to their build plan. But enter 50 other programs that have the same build plan with a lot of branches, it gets pretty complicated. None of those cadences ever aligned again. So, obviously it got a little bit harder, right? We didn't scale well. The other problem that we faced was our release planning was so low level of detail that it just became infuriating to people to change. So when you're trying to get people to buy into this, and they're like, but I just planned this whole sprint yesterday, and you're telling me I have to throw it in the trash, they're not going to buy into it. They're going to get pretty frustrated because they're not seeing the value. They're seeing churn. I can't get out of the gate. I'm like a race car, and I'm trying to run on a mud track. I'm stuck in the gate. The other thing that we had faced, and we're still trying to change this culture a little bit, is that those traditional management styles, marching towards an S-curve, using earned value management.
What's an S-curve?
And the last time I gave this, somebody asked the same question. I just remember that. So an S-curve is basically a gradual progress of getting from start to completion, and it usually looks like an S, right?
Yep.
But in order to have an S-curve, everything must start at the same time. So when you have a CSL and there's 50 programs feeding this CSL, and you've got large-scale release planning, and every program stakeholders in there saying, well, my stuff has to get started now, and some guy's like, well, my stuff does too, and my stuff does too. It's like this big argument, and all the teams are like, okay, we have to listen, right? We're going to get in trouble because that's how we've traditionally managed things. You end up with a WIP problem. Is everybody familiar with WIP? Okay. Yes. We had a massive WIP problem. So has anybody ever seen a feature burn down chart? So all of our burn down charts in the beginning look like plateaus. Yes, because we had a massive WIP problem. I'm like, guys, does this say something? Metrics. Because of traditional management methods, we had a number of metrics that we always used. We shifted towards Agile metrics. Never really got rid of the old metrics. All of these metrics just created some bad behavior. We'd sit in a large room for like a program review, and you'd have the people that didn't quite get it and say, are you gonna meet your plan? I can't tell by looking at this build-up plan that you're now showing me. I don't get it, right? And then it just created like the person standing up there was just getting ridiculed instead of them trying to help support and address some of the problems. It was that fear factor, right? We don't want that. So, even though our release planning indicated that things that we couldn't do, from capacity perspective and whatnot, we got no relief, right? Everybody wanted their stuff done, right? Everybody wanted a piece of the cake. There was no, even though we tried to instill prioritization methods, it didn't matter at the end of the day because the program still wanted what the programs wanted. So again, they didn't shift their mentality, right, to understand that. So in the end, I won't say in the end, halfway in the middle, right, we learned that planning a whole release was a bad idea, right? So now we plan just enough. Imagine that. We plan just enough because software is unpredictable, right? We know that. And what we've learned and what should have been obvious from the beginning is that you shouldn't really plan things to a point where a team can actually start executing if there isn't enough information. So if you in a scaled model, if you have a feature that says, go off and do this component, that's really not enough information to plan. We don't know why. We don't know what the goals are, right? So plan what you know, right? And that's what we've done. We've shifted away from the big room planning and have migrated to continuous planning. So with continuous planning comes work in process limits. So now that we know more about this, we're trying to do a better job at limiting that, right? We're helping it to drive better decisions, and this is facilitated by understanding what those business objectives are. Again, it's almost like a Kanban board at that level, right? So they are maintaining that backlog and that work in process. Right, so it helps it control throughout the organization when you maintain it at that top level.
Yeah, question on that. Does this
Go ahead.
include like improvement initiatives, or is it just the
Absolutely.
business drivers? So,
It's both.
Okay.
And then that's a couple slides.
Oh,
We'll get to that in a
okay.
second. So to facilitate this also comes a level of continuous backlog grooming. So with release planning, big room planning, we're creating a backlog at one time, right? And then we do a couple of iterations and we revisit that again at another time. With continuous planning, continuous backlog grooming, that happens more frequently. And we're still trying to figure out what the right cadence is for us, somewhere between 1 and 3 weeks. And I would say it would be different for any organization. And maybe it's not a consistent thing, but the idea is that there's always a team there that's grooming that backlog, that understands what the work is and what's to come, so that you can make decisions on what to plan for the teams. Bless you. And then obviously we're trying better to coordinate our cadences, right, so that you get the release planning and at scale. So this is just kind of like a visual of what this might look like. So if you start with some objectives, right, and you have those responsible individuals on the side there, you start migrating through the system, right? A group of things, not the whole thing, starts to move forward, right? And now we're getting to the point where the executive said, all right, these things are ready for the teams to plan. Okay, so these program managers start taking these objectives and start breaking them down into features, right? The program managers hand them off to the teams. They start decomposing them into epics. So for epics, we use epics to represent use cases and threads of work to help us organize. And then hand them off to the teams, right? And they start to create user stories. So that's kind of how we have worked to minimize the amount of work being planned and the work in progress or process. Go ahead.
So when you decompose these, is there a soft language, so is the acceptance criteria for the feature basically, these 3 epics have to be done and the epic kind of groups the work?
So we use Jira to help us facilitate this. And we use the linking relationship to help tie all these things together. And the fields, we have some custom fields that identify acceptance criteria. One of the plugins we use is I think it's called Checklist. Yeah, and so you can click off all the acceptance criteria. And one of the workflows we have says you can't move anything else until all of those things are actually checked off. So Jira helps us facilitate this. I don't want to get like tool specific because I know a number of tools exist out there. That's what we use.
We're using Rally, and the components are linked, but it's hard to get. So the feature is, the epic is build me a widget. And what we're not doing a great job is decomposing. What does it mean to build a widget? Well, you got to put these fields on here. You got to capture this. You got to pull this data. You got to do the look and feel. That's where my team is kind of struggling about decomposing, because you can't really look at the feature and have a good sense of what are the 10 things I need to do. And I was just wondering if there were better solutions.
We've definitely had problems with that, and a lot of it just is surrounding the grooming. So just building that acceptance criteria and getting people on board with what that means. So a lot of it is facilitated through actually planning poker. And some teams don't use the points anymore. They just kind of get together to discuss the stories. But the idea is just to get everybody on the same page with what people understand, so they're not missing anything. And if there is anything missing, then go to the stakeholders for further clarification. Just some questions in here? No? Okay. As you can see, now we have some things moving into the to-do phase. Those 3 features include those 3 epics. It moves those sets of stories, right? And these things start to move, right? Feature. Now that we have one in progress, now we can start talking about some other objectives that we can assess. So as you can see, this is very much a flow system at the very top that really just facilitates what's in process underneath of it to control the work in progress or process for the organization. And so, they can make good decisions at the high level, and the team has some level of understanding as to what the priorities are at their level. So now, you start planning more things. Now you're planning just in time. More things shift to across this workflow here. And as things move to done at the lowest level, then obviously the parent things also move to done, right? And then start moving things forward again. So you can see it's a very natural flow system at all levels. Again, the goal here is to facilitate good backlog grooming, continuous planning, and reduce your work in process.
Is it possible that you would have, how do you control the capacity of those teams? Isn't it possible that Team A and Team A1 and A2 maybe have a lot of work where B2 and C1 might not have any?
Yeah, we've created some tools to help us understand that. So basically we have, at the team of teams level, we have an overall capacity. And then when work is heavy in one area, again, or from a capacity standpoint, that's when we start shifting the work to different teams to balance it out. So I'm like spreading the peanut butter to help us. It works, right?
It does.
Feel free to use it. To help us kind of understand what that looks like. Are we great at it? Not yet, but we've gotten better. So ultimately, from a scaled perspective, the goal is to have a systems integrated product on a regular basis, right? There's a number of things that we need in place to facilitate this well. And we need to understand what our blockers are, right? To be able to produce those things on a regular basis. You might have product blockers throughout. You might have red tape, governance, personalities. All of those things can be blockers to the system, right? I get a lot of the red guy, the angry guy. So I have little kids. So I know every Pixar movie out there. Right, but it's crucial to understand where your blockers are in this type of scaled model, because blockers on other teams will block other teams and you won't be able to get things done, right? And that's what we want to do. You won't be able to meet your product increment milestones. So if you understand what those things are, you've got bottlenecks, now you've got cycle time delays, but we're still trying to get product out the door. How do we balance that, right? And there's no one-size-fits-all answer, of course, but it's a balance act. So when we talked about business objectives, somebody asked, business objectives versus improvement things in that backlog, that's where this balance can come into play. What do we need to do to minimize those bottlenecks, but still get product out the door, right? We have to state that clear in our objectives so that organizationally we know that we're trying to improve the process and deliver, right? Which brings me, I'm going to jump down here because we are starting to run out of time, but brings us to like the shift in the iron triangle where scope is supposed to be the negotiable in an agile model versus in traditional model it's not, right? So when you run into things like that and you're finding bottlenecks in your process, you have to negotiate some scope so that you can make some changes and have a better product or better work environment, things you need to change to get product out the door faster. All right, so our initial investments. Or training, obviously. We talked about forming teams. We talked about reorganizing and tools and new roles and all these things that led us to a consultant to tell us what some of us already knew basically, right? Only because, again, we jumped into this, we tried to do Agile immediately off the bat, and there was no focus on what it meant to be Agile, right? Meanwhile, things like automation and architectural improvements, which are also part of the Agile principles, were a second thought, right? So, again, the expense is not in just doing Agile, it's obviously in being, right? So, talking about scaling some of the principles again, number 9 talks about continuous attention to technical excellence, right? So, this is about creating business objectives centered around doing good things. Improving your code quality, maybe it's decoupling, refactoring, re-architecting, right? Feature toggles. Number 3 talks about delivering working software frequently. So what are we doing to invest in automation? You can't do continuous delivery without having good automated regression tests. So if you don't make that investment, the thought of just jumping into doing continuous delivery will totally backfire. Pushing for value. So I mentioned we just jumped into adding Agile things on top of things that we already did, right? We didn't take a step back at some of the things that have already been in existence, and we didn't ask ourselves, are these things still valuable? Or are we just doing it because somebody never changed a rule somewhere? Or we're just stuck, going through the motions, right? Agile is supposed to deliver value. So if anything that is part of your daily routine or organizational routine does not deliver value, question it. Why are we still doing it? So in summary, for lesson number 3, right, we use the empirical process, that rinse, wash, repeat process, to identify what we need to be Agile. What does this organization need, right? Invest in laying the groundwork first. Right? There's a lot of things that you need to put in place to get that cultural buy-in so this becomes successful. What are they? They're different for every organization. How do you get from adoption to transformation? That's key if you want to be successful with this. Again, eliminating waste, what doesn't provide value. And I put this example of a house in here because if you don't lay the foundation, right, for your organization, your house isn't going to be able to stand on top of it, right? You think about a house, you live in it, it gets battered by weather, et cetera, but if you're not inspecting the foundation or if you're not putting a strong foundation into that house, it's not going to really stand strong on top of it. And that's what we need to be successful. So to wrap this up, because I'm a mom and I do a lot of laundry, this is my analogy here. Agile is continuous, right? Your evolution, your transformation is like laundry. It never ends. Because I know as soon as I think I'm done laundry, my kids run in and they're full of mud, right? And I do laundry again. So, and this is important. If you're in that continuous improvement, right? You're never really done. You should always want to improve. And that's being Agile. That's a mindset, right? You can have a good process in place and you're gaining from it and everybody's happy, but underneath all of that, you should always be looking for ways to improve. And that's part of your journey. All these scaled models, they're great, right? But I look at them as a grocery store. There's a lot of ingredients on those models, right? A lot of them. And you can start with a process or a framework, whatever it might be, and that might be your initial recipe, right? But look at these things and choose a couple of different ingredients. Maybe you tried, Kanban for you, and it wasn't the right ingredient. So go to the store and try Scrum, right? Or whatever from any of these models. The idea here is that you have, these provide a way to get started. You have the ability to flex these things, right? And that's important. What's your recipe? So in summary, don't jump into it. Don't do it. You'll fall on that cliff, right? Scale the principles. It's really important to understand what the principles are. Agile is based off of that. The scaled Agile is based off of the same set of principles. So assuming that you're doing Agile, it's going to make you better, faster, cheaper is a pretty broad assumption, as you have learned from me today. Avoid the information overload, right? We don't want to just scare people and make them drink through the fire hose. Invest in your organization, invest in what it means to be Agile, identify what that is. And dissect all the different components of your organization and understand what part do they play in this, right? I'm sure there's a number of support functions that people don't even think of that may have had some document somewhere that says you can't do, you have to do waterfall level milestones. You have to do a design inspection and a code inspection, right? Well, where were they as being a stakeholder in your adoption and going forward, right? All those entities have a part in this because it's a scaled model. It's your whole organization. So it's important to dissect that information and understand the value that each part of those entities bring so that your adoption can be smoothly transitioned. So with that, I'd like to open up to you guys who has other questions since we've had a number of questions already. Go ahead.
I assume that you have definition of dones. Do you have, I guess, does each team have its own individual definition of done, or is there, I guess, like you said, code reviews and some of those? Do you have like certain standards
Yes, we
that
do.
are across all teams?
That's a great question. So for us, because we're CMMI level 5, we've had a lot of those types of doneness criteria in place for a long time. We've evolved those things to fit our Agile model. So a lot of those existing procedures that were really done criteria in essence have shifted from being based off of waterfall to Agile.
Yes.
So they're organizational done criteria, and then teams can develop charters. And so those are things that they march to, and then of course acceptance criteria.
Yeah, and then do you also extend it into, I guess, definition of ready for some of that? Do you have good standards on definition of ready?
Right, and that's again part of our CMMI level 5 criteria. Yeah, so it's a pretty lengthy list of things, and we're actually trying to scale it down to one sheet of paper so people can understand it and they're not overwhelmed by information. But yeah, those we've been fortunate to have those things in place for us, which is why we're CMMI level 5. We've just evolved them to fit the Agile model.
In one of your slides, you had executives that that basically break down the business objectives. Who are those executives? CTO?
I think
Who are they?
it varies per organization. So for us, we have an SLT, a senior leadership team. For Lockheed, they have a couple of different leadership teams that do different things. So I don't think there's a one-size-fits-all answer. I hate to keep using that term, but it's so true. It's just the people that are apt to make decisions and understand that support and have bought into Agile. So it's that type of leadership figures. You can have like management teams feeding that leadership team based off of their objectives, because you might have different entities within the organization that have their own objectives that ultimately feed up to one maybe more general objective. There's a number of ways to think about it, and it really is dependent upon how your organization is organized and who's in charge of making decisions. So, I don't know, does that help answer? Okay.
Thank you.
Go ahead.
Can we go back to the slide with your weak links? I do have some assumption they want to confirm. Related to your, this concept about there's a WIP limit across the platform. Are you setting a WIP limit within each team, or are you setting like a WIP limit at the portfolio level?
So right now, we're setting WIP limits at the top because that's what's facilitating which work gets planned. Teams that we have a combination of teams practicing different frameworks at the bottom. So they're doing Scrum, they're doing Scrumban, they're doing Kanban for the most part. So the ones that have shifted towards pure Kanban, they're starting to identify what their WIP limits are. The key thing is when you're starting with this type of model is to start at the top. And don't jump into it initially, just say 5 arbitrarily for one item in your workflow. Play for a while and figure out what's right? I find that just making decisions and going for it just causes disasters, big or small. So play first and then determine what's appropriate and understand that there's wiggle room to adjust. But that's what has helped us kind of facilitate that at the top level first.
So
and the teams are empowered to make decisions.
So when you look at your next slide, which is all the hierarchy, this business objective, is it documented in Jira?
Yes. Yes. So everything in this type of image here is documented all the way down. So I think I talked to you prior. So we use a tool called Structure, and Structures will plug into Jira. It's an issue organizing tool. It's made by ALM Works, I think is the company, but it helps kind of organize hence the issue organizer. This type of view of the world. So you can it's a configurable tool very much like Jira, and you can start from the highest level item in your organization and extend it through links. So it depends on the use of linked relationships in Jira, for those of us that are familiar with Jira, to facilitate that type of view of the world. So all this stuff goes in Jira.
So the WIP limit is really at the business objective and features level.
Yes.
More so than the
Correct.
And then the second question is on your, all these releases that we talked about, right? So with so many competing priorities, when you're trying to release, do you have this concept in which you kind of, because we are continuously releasing,
right?
Okay, we release version 1 and then tomorrow or 2 days later we release 1.1 and then 2 days later we release 1.2. Is it how you guys vision, releases, or do you have some like overhead that you incur? So
right now, we have been blessed with lots of overhead in releasing.
Yes,
I mean, and a lot of it too is still just government red tape, just the process we have to go through to get things out to the ship. Obviously, we don't want to put something on a ship, but we're afraid it's going to blow something up. Right? Yeah.
Oh, I see. Got it.
So we have to have a level of overhead, but in terms of releasing to like level 2 on testing, we're working on increasing our amount of automation there. So we're migrating. We're in the process of migrating now to DevOps. And so we're looking at tools to help us facilitate that, like Jenkins. Jenkins integrates with Jira. And then we're using Git. We're migrating from ClearCase to Git. We're going to use Bitbucket and Crucible, and Jenkins is really going to help us with automation. And we're still trying to define what tools we're going to use after that. So right now, our releasing is based off of our automation ability, aside from our legacy way of deploying builds. So we're kind of doing 2 things in parallel right now. Our traditional way of releasing builds, right, because of the risk associated with that for us. It's probably very different for other companies. But now we're in parallel, we've got a DevOps migration, and we're determining what tool sets are working best for us. We're Java and C++, we're using Maven and Conan to help with those types of things.
Because my lesson learned is that in our organization, we still have this mindset in which, say, if we are releasing 15 features, it is all needed for this release. If that 15 features is still work in progress, we may have to wait and...
So feature toggles. We have a way of doing toggling, but you have, with us, we have to obviously be very careful. But feature toggles is a great way to continue to release and have partially implemented code kind of hidden in there. It's just not executable, right? So there's lots of information out there on how to implement feature toggles. So that would drastically reduce your overhead in releasing and enabling your ability to release more frequently.
Thank you.
Yep. Great questions. Anything else?
Are you dictatorial in your decomposition of work? Like if everyone's not decomposing work the same, it kind of...
We go to a certain level. So for a metrics perspective, we kind of go to here, this level, and then once it gets into the team of teams, they have some freedom to decompose however they
them
want.
do it how they want in their teams. But
And that's
to a
not
certain
how it
level.
always was. When it was dictated, it was not good. Because, again, not one solution fits everybody, right? And give the team some autonomy and empowerment. So in order to get metrics from what program management people want to see, we say you at least have to have a business objective or a program feature in our world and a product feature. And underneath of that, let the teams determine how they want to decompose their work. Right? We have some teams that don't use epics, but the vast majority of them do. And then they decompose and what the epics are used for. The vast majority is threads and use cases. Some other teams just use them for placeholders. Some teams just use them as a way to organize a group of similar work, if it's like a bunch of bug fixes in a certain area or something like that, right? And then underneath we use user stories, or in some cases just bug, right? For like maintenance type of work. So there's a number of ways to do it. It really depends on your organization, your team, what the team's charter is, and so forth. So does that answer your question?
Yeah, so just get to a certain standard and then let teams be autonomous.
Yes. You need to have some level of control from an
Yeah.
organizational standpoint, but you don't want to ruin the autonomy.
You don't want to command and control all the way down.
Exactly.
What is red tape?
Bureaucracy.
What's that?
Command and control. You shall do this. We have this process in place. Why are you not following it? Like, it's a lot of rules and restrictions that kind of prevent autonomy. It's a level of control, and I agree some level of control is needed, especially in like mission critical type of industries, health industries, those types of things where you need that. But a lot of people say that red tape really hinders your ability to be agile. So for certain industries, what's the right level of red tape? Maybe just a little bit.
Yeah, like how much
Not
documentation
overall,
you really need.
Yes.
Because it's, like you said, it goes stale.
Right.
So it's like, what, we need it, yes, but can we shrink it even more and more?
Yes, exactly. So, all right. Well, I really appreciate your time. If you have any questions?